guys. I guess we can start. I've got all the buttons pushed and everything. Nice to see you all. How is it today?
Great. Nice to be here.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Great to be here.
Happy spring.
Happy spring. I get a new puppy tomorrow.
Oh, exciting.
Wow.
I love puppies.
You're both on the West Coast, so your spring is a little more exciting than the New York one here.
Definitely spring outside, I'll tell you.
It's beautiful, yeah.
So welcome everybody that's logging on right now to our today's chat. As you know, we're going to talk about social media dangers. How can we make it safer for kids? I'm Diana Graver. I'm the author of Raising Humans in a Digital World and founder of CyberWise and CyberCivics. I'm here as always with Dr. Pamela Rutledge, who's the director of the Media Psychology Research Center. Also joining us today is CJ Lindsay. He'll be keeping an eye on our chat box. If you have questions as we go along, feel free to put them in there. He is going to interrupt us and ask us any pertinent questions. He also has an announcement for us in just a moment. But first of all, I want to say how excited we are to welcome our special guest and someone I have personally enjoyed chatting with in the past, David Ryan Polgar, who's the founder and executive director of All Tech is Human, an organization you're going to hear a lot about in just a moment. But first, CJ, do you want to share our special news today?
Yeah, so exciting news. If you enjoy these CyberWise chats, we have actually taken the backlog of 16 episodes and turned them into a podcast. So it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts. It should be most everywhere that you listen to your podcast. So if you like the information here and you're looking to continue the education on previous episodes, the whole backlog, all 16 episodes are available right now. So go check it out.
It's amazing, CJ. Thank you.
Thank you. For so long, people have recommended that, and it's just so much work. And CJ really put the work in, and we so appreciate it. So thank you. So today webinar, we'll keep doing these. And as you heard, we're going to talk about social media dangers. You guys have heard the dangers, right? Cyberbullying, sexting, misinformation, political polarization, inappropriate conduct, et cetera, et cetera. So today we're going to really focus on how all stakeholders, that's parents, schools, policymakers, and tech companies, can work together to mitigate these risks and keep social media safer for our kids. I know this is something that David works on daily. So I think this is a good time maybe to tell us a little bit more about All Tech is Human and what you're doing about these problems.
Thank you. And it's been a pleasure, getting to know you and just always been inspired by all your work. I know we met each other at the Digital Citizenship Summit that I co-founded in 2015 in Connecticut, and then also the following year at Twitter headquarters, right to kick off our US Media Literacy Week right in the fall of 2016. Right before people really started talking about media literacy after our US election. But with All Tech is Human, that's a nonprofit 501c3 that I started in 2018. The idea behind the organization is that we are building the quote unquote responsible tech ecosystem, making it more diverse, multidisciplinary, and aligned with the public interest. We're focused on three major buckets. One around education, because we hold these really large open working groups that release these impactful community reports. For example, we just started one on AI and human rights that has about 300 people across the globe taking part in these collaboration. And then specifically for today's conversation, we recently released a report called the HX report, right? Moving from kind of the user experience to the human experience, really perfectly for your earlier book, focusing on the humans behind the screens. You can find that at hxreport.org. We also released one the previous year on improving social media that you can find at improvingsocialmedia.com. So outside of education, we also focus on disrupting the underlying pipeline, because we need people like that are attending this webinar to be involved in how we develop and deploy technology. Right. They're oftentimes not. We need more attorneys, psychologists, sociologists, people who understand and appreciate ethics, responsibility, human behavior. Social media, by its very nature, is about how humans interact. Yet, from its initial design, we put kind of an over-index on technologists and really underutilized social scientists and people who actually think about unintended consequences. I like to say that we kind of focus so much on problem solvers, but not enough on problem finders, right? People who actually say, this could be an issue, let's fix it. And lastly, we unite a diverse range of stakeholders to tackle some of the thorniest issues in tech and society, like misinformation, hate speech, CSAM, some of the worst that are really complex, nuanced topics that benefit by bringing together policymakers, parents, students, researchers, and others. And that's a lot of what we do. Previous to COVID, we held a lot of ethical tech summits in San Francisco, Seattle, New York, and we're doing a bunch right now. So people can always kind of reach out our way at alltechishuman.org. Certainly got our hands full because there's a lot of issues, as we'll talk about today, with social media.
Great. Well, thank you, David. And policy holders, parents, educators, all those people are important. We're going to talk about that today. But first, I kind of want to quickly turn to Pam, because I want, like, we all have these dangers that, you know, we hear about.
Right.
In your view, what are the biggest social media dangers that parents should be worried about?
Well, since we're talking today about this multi-stakeholder event, which I think is super important, the biggest danger is that we have legislators legislating when they don't use social media and they don't understand the kids' experience. So I'm really happy to hear, David, that you're bringing people from this multidisciplinary landscape in, because that is so important. It's, you know, like the original gaming research where the people who did the research had never played a video game. Mm-hmm. So it's very important. And the other real big danger in my mind is that somehow parents think these companies and these rules are supposed to protect their kids. And it really is boots on the ground when it comes to making sure that your kids are protected with media literacy, critical thinking, all of the stuff that we talk about here every month. So to me, those are the two biggest dangers, that it looks like somebody else is solving the problem and we don't help.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly say what parents say the biggest danger is: screen time, cyberbullying. And I disagree. I think the biggest danger is misinformation. I think that's a huge one that we have. And also I think the second one that we don't really hear about so much is content, like what kids are seeing, because there's so many young kids online and there's really a lot of disturbing content that I think they should be shielded from. So that's what I think. And David, in your view, like if you were to pick what would you say?
You know, I guess my biggest concern is how we relate to one another, specifically with kind of influencer culture. I also serve on TikTok's Content Advisory Council and a few other working groups. And one of the things that I always think about and debate and hopefully try to reduce is this kind of over-reliance on kind of metrics, as we talked about before, right? Ensuring that we're posting what we want to post, not what will always be liked. And how do we ensure that we are conveying our true kind of humanity and who we are, our individualism? Because that's kind of the promise of social media, and by extension, the web, is that it should increase our social nature and our ability for free expression. But oftentimes it quickly turns into a performance art. But also outside of that, you know, just the ability to, you know, something I'm always inspired by your work, right, of showcasing kind of empathy. You know, how do we ensure that we know that, you know, the person on the other end of the screen is not going to bleed zeros and ones? They're you know, an actual individual. How do we always maintain our humanity as we oftentimes, especially now through a 2-year pandemic, are conveying that the person on the other side of the screen matters. And that's something we always have to think about, because oftentimes we can really objectify and kind of treat somebody like an avatar when they're not.
Can't legislate that, by the way.
No, you cannot. Right, exactly. And there's no magic button for that, right?
No,
because
there's nothing
oftentimes
social media
assuming,
company can do to make a kid have more empathy. I'm telling you that right now. That's on us as parents and educators. So we'll get to them in a second, but I do want to start with the tech companies,
sure, because
they're important. Do we think they're doing enough? Pam, do you think they're doing enough? And what are they doing?
Well, I mean, anytime you have a commercial concern, they have obligations to their shareholders, they have fiduciary responsibility. So it's really maybe a little naive to expect that all they care about is their users' well-being, right? That's not their primary goal. They're trying to stay in business. They want the users happy, right? Because they need them, because they need to make money to pay their shareholders. So there's really some balance there. So I think when you consider with just TikTok, 1 billion monthly users, how in God's name is anybody going to monitor that amount of content? So we all have to participate. But I think where the tech companies fall down is providing ways for citizens to participate in helping monitor and feedback and empowering kids, which is what you do all the time, Diana, to how do you respond to things? How do you, say that's not okay? Or how do you find what you want to see? I'll tell you, I find TikTok very difficult when I'm looking for certain things because it's just a barrage.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I understand it's a business and all that, but it's just irritating to me that the tech companies respond rather than doing something upfront. For example, TikTok gets slammed with all those privacy violations a couple years ago. All of a sudden, they come out with great parental controls. Same thing with Instagram, terrible press, all fall. Guess what? Last week, Instagram has new parental controls. And by the way, they're almost exactly the same as TikTok's. So, great thinking. I hope they didn't pay a lot of money to have those people put that together. So,
well, there's a lot of best practices, right? That, you have got groups like the Trust and Safety Professional Alliance and others that share best practices kind of behind the scenes for this growing kind of trust and safety kind of field. But I mean, I think this is not just unique to social media. That's just a corporate kind of concern we always have, is that oftentimes people are making cost benefit analysis. I mean, go look up Firestone Tire, what happened there early on when their tires were blowing up and people were dying, but they did a cost benefit analysis on how much lawsuits cost, and that dictated their decisions, as opposed to the fact that it was a family, in a car that was affected by their tires. So I think with companies, the big thing I've seen, I remember I had this slide that had, the Simpsons between a rock and a hard place, this kind of famous scene. And that's what I always kind of hear from a lot of companies, because to not act is to be negligent, and to act is to assert power that is an unelected kind of official, right? So to take down misinformation, that makes certain people happy, but then it also makes another group happy. I mean, just look at the Hunter Biden situation, and we don't know what to do. So a lot of times companies, one of the reasons why they're trying to always delegate responsibility is because there's a paradox, because they have this public pressure to act, but different than an elected official that can be voted out of office, and we give moral authority to those elected officials through our democratic norms. You don't have that in a company. However, the public is starting to relate to social media as if it's something more than a company. And this is where a lot of this issue is headed. For example, everyone on social media talks about Twitter being a public square. Well, a public square is actually, that's part of the three branches of government, that you have checks and balances, and you have one group making laws, the other one enforcing them, the other one interpreting them. We confine that under judge, jury, and executioner. No wonder there's a problem. So we actually have a lot to kind of iron out over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Do you think it matters? Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm not. Go ahead, Pam.
I was just going to say, do you think it matters, David, or do you think it's a challenge for these tech companies because they're continually trying to innovate to keep users, which means they're actually inventing things that they don't even really understand the implications of.
Right. Yeah.
So they would have to slow down production or the introduction of new features if they were really going to do that sort of chess game of what could happen. Do they think about that?
Well, they're thinking about it a lot more, but that's where public pressure and pressure from policymakers does make a difference, right? That's the good news, is that sometimes in a capitalistic type of structure, you need to have these different points of pressure. My own personal opinion is that social media companies got in over their skis, because we wrongly define social media as if it's tech and as if it's an app that gets your pizza there quicker, right? Like, that doesn't have huge consequences to humanity, the human condition, and democracy at large. But social media, we originally kind of defined it as if it's like, oh, look, we're just connecting people. But in fact, since it changes the news you get, it changes your experiences and who you vote for. We look at what's going on in Russia. Your even conception of reality is being distorted by your lack of proper information and the kind of abundance of disinformation that is altering somebody's conception of what is even happening on the ground. That's a big deal. So in other words, tech companies are now in the kind of realm of something so consequential that eventually it's going to have to be integrated more into our political bodies. So if I was looking at where I think this is actually headed, eventually there's probably going to be a greater kind of integration. We might have elected officials kind of intertwined with social media, because if we're going to call it the public square, then that also means that we should treat it with the same level of seriousness and accountability and transparency and fairness that we would with the actual public square that we would have.
And I just want to say one thing, Dave, really quickly, because this is really big picture, which is so important.
Yes.
We have a lot of parents that are listening, and for
Sure.
parents, do be aware that there are some parental controls on these apps. And a lot of people, I talk to parents all the time that don't have any idea how to use them or where they are. So in most of those apps that kids use, if you go into the settings, you can find pretty good controls. The point is, will kids use them? Will they keep them on there after you set them up with them? Probably not.
Defaults are so crucial, right? So, and that's what I would say to all the parents kind of listening, is that that's where eventually this area is going to be headed. So even if you look at, just as a fun fact, right, like a lot more Canadians will donate their organs than Americans. Well, why does that happen? Because we have to opt in America, and Canadians opt out. Right. That subtle difference, same thing in social media. If you make something a default, people use it because that's what people, are used to.
And a great example of that is Instagram's new privacy settings they just introduced last week. In order to use them, your child has to ask you, like, Mom, will you please set up? Did you know that you have to request your parent? So we're going to get to that part in a minute, because we're going to talk about kids, because they're such an important part of this stakeholder group. They're actually the most important part. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move to the next group, which is legislation. Legislation really pushed the tech companies to make some changes, so it is effective. There's a couple laws going around right now for those who are unaware. Let's see here. There's the Kids Online Safety Act that came after this legislation, after all these high-profile hearings in Congress. It will do a bunch of things. For example, it would give parents and users under 16 the ability to opt out of algorithmic recommendations. That's a big one. Prevent third parties from viewing a minor's data, and limit the time kids spend on the platform. So it'll do a bunch of other things. Those are just three of the big ones. What do we think about this? You like this, Pam?
Well, I wanted to even make a distinction when you said parental controls. There are some parental controls that I think are very positive, right? Understanding what happens to the data, understanding the sort of privacy settings, that kind of thing. I am not in favor of the sort of big brother, mommy cop apps, because it's teaching exactly the opposite thing that you want these kids to learn. We want them to learn responsibility, critical thinking. We want to have an open conversation about how they're using it. And if they feel untrusted or that they're spied upon, then to me, that's really setting the ball back. And you just told the kid, please don't talk to me about problems you have with technology, because I'm going to take your phone. So it's very important to distinguish between age-appropriate parental controls, where you're really controlling things that matter, and these, I don't want to teach my kid, I just want to, be a spy on them. So I think that's a big differentiation. The algorithmic following, I think, is huge. And I don't think how many people understand how algorithms work, and I only barely do.
Yeah.
But
that's what drives me crazy about this law. It says it will restrict algorithmic following, blah, blah. You think anyone even knows what that means or how to make it work? Why don't you teach this? I'm pointing to the head for those of you listening on a podcast.
Right. Well, if you
train what an algorithm is and how to control, because we have that control right now, but people don't really understand how it all works and how to make it, customized on each of the different things that we use.
Yeah, an algorithm is good or bad only in how it was written. It isn't fundamentally a bad thing, right? Algorithms run all kinds of things, from your GPS to, your TV. So it's really important to recognize that there are certain kinds of algorithms, like what people who are doing risk for life insurance, right? That are including in algorithms things that are structurally promoting racism, right? So there's all kinds of problems, but they come with the assumptions and the building blocks of an algorithm, not with algorithms per se.
Yeah. So David, what's your feeling? Well, let's talk about that specific law that's Congress right now. Are you feeling good about it? Do you think it's written properly? Are there pieces in it that you would add, take out?
I think it's well, one, in the United States, we propose so much that then never goes anywhere. Like the most consequential one, right? Section 230 comes from 1996. So we have been very slow, which a lot of people, globally kind of point. I think it's circling important areas that are probably going to be more important for us to determine, right? So for example, privacy and data. Those are the big issues that Americans overwhelmingly agree with. Different than the UK and Europe, United States is very much a state system, right? And that's why California is always ahead of the curve with data privacy, following GDPR in Europe. I think what should, in my opinion, happen is we need to set safeguards around it. I think right now it's a little too much of following the news of what's hot, because social media is constantly evolving, right? Like we don't even know what it's going to look like in 2 years. So it's very hard to kind of try to create a law given what is currently happening. But around data privacy and data sharing, that's where we create baselines of understanding. In other words, we need a national data privacy law that says legal, illegal, because most time social media companies, as all companies do in the United States, they traditionally are trying to maximize their profits within the confines of legality. This is why we talk about both law and ethics, because both of them are going to kind of intersect with one another. So I would say that's what really needs to change. Data privacy law, cut certain things out. You can't monetize this. And then certain other areas around age are going to be important as well. And that's far more than trying to do kind of like a grab bag of various items.
And I'm going to check in with CJ real quick. Did we have a question out there?
Yeah, I was about to interrupt. And so what is the name of the law is the question that you were bringing up, Diana. Is there a name for it?
It's called, so the one that's going through Congress right now is called the Kids Online Safety Act. But David mentioned California, and I do want to mention an interesting piece of legislation happening here in our great state, the Social Media Platform Duty to Children Act. It would give California parents the ability to sue social media giants like TikTok and Snap for addicting their children. I don't even know where to go with that one, because
well, yeah, first of all, social media addiction isn't actually in the American Psychological Diagnostic and Statistical Manuals. So I don't know how they're going to establish that baseline, but that's one where the lawyers are laughing all the way to the bank, man. Because
Pam and I were joking about this earlier, because it's like, I'm going to sue Hershey because my kid eats too much chocolate. So not a problem. Sort of the same thing. So we gotta move on here, because I think there's really important constituencies that can do something.
Yeah.
Parents, educators, children. Oh, do we have another one, CJ?
Yeah, just before we move on specifically on the question about laws. There's a question of, do you think that specific laws will just push these platforms to then, set up shop outside of the United States? Because teens don't really care where the company is. They just want a social media that fits their needs. Is there a concern about that, or how would you address that?
Well, TikTok's a great example, because it's a Chinese company. So how does TikTok, what do they do, David?
Well, I mean, all of the social media companies are global now. I mean, look into, if you really want to go on a deep dive, look into why they all have offices in Ireland. It's all tax reasons, right? So every major tech company has an office in Ireland, and they switch around their IP and they charge the US one to save a lot of money on taxes, right? So there's a lot of funny things that are happening. And the big issue, and I'm kind of dealing with this right now, is that the very idea of the web is supposed to be a global village, right? So we have social media companies that are really torn between their kind of American and Western ideals of what free expression means versus constituents all across the globe. For example, a lot of social media companies get in a lot of issues with a country like Turkey, where they might say, okay, this is you have to take this down. And then that tech company is trying to say, all right, well, we have people over in Turkey, we have an office there, but we're also based in the United States, and we're trying to promote a certain level of ideal. So it's this classic kind of issue of, is the social media's duty? Is it around kind of extending this kind of American openness, or do they kind of evolve to each of those areas? This is where we always have talked about China, and you had major tech companies early on trying to get into China and then being turned down. But it obviously led to a huge media debate because people were saying, well, wait a minute, you can't bend your who you are too much. And that's a huge issue we're always having. So I think over the coming years, there's going to be a greater need for groups like the United Nations and then also the World Economic Forum that obviously has a very global footprint to get involved, because there's a greater need to actually say, what is every country doing? How do we think of this on a global stage? Because yeah, I mean, all different countries are creating their own rules, and tech companies are just really kind of they don't know where to go with this.
Yeah, and a great example of this, again, is TikTok, because it's a Chinese-based company. It's available almost everywhere in the world except for China.
Well, they split up the app,
Russia,
though, right? So like that's kind of its unusual kind of history, right? Where it originally came from Musical.ly, and then switching over to TikTok, and then they have basically a TikTok cousin that would be over in China, and then.
But it's because they restrict what's on that, whereas we don't restrict so much what we see in the United States. So that's the big distinction.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And then the Chinese kind of law that always kind of comes up in the media around how China is able to kind of claw something back, and that's always a major concern for Americans, and that's why TikTok and other companies, they talk about where they house their data, and that's always going to be important.
Right. So we've talked about legislation, we've talked about, tech companies, but really, like, parents have to step up too. And like I mentioned earlier, there are tools that parents can use. Kids got to be 13 to use these things. I mean, come on, that's such an easy thing for parents to do, is have their kids wait. And I'll tell you, if you don't agree with me, please go to TikTok today, search Ukraine war, and spend half an hour looking at those scary images and think about your 9-year-old alone in his or her bedroom watching that by themselves. So, the content they're seeing is very adult-like. There's a lot of stuff happening in our world today that I think under 13-year-olds, if for no other reason, they're just not ready for that yet. So what else can parents do to kind of keep the social media environment safer for our kids? Pam?
Well, sorry, Pam.
Well, no, I'll just go back to the conversations, but your point is really interesting, because a week ago in the mass media, there was a big blow up because Kim Kardashian was fighting with Kanye West about whether their 8-year-old daughter should have a social media account, an Instagram account, or a TikTok account. And she wanted to, Kim said, well, I just want to encourage her creativity, and I'm doing it with her. And, they're a unique example, because of course they've made their money out of social media. So it'd be pretty hard to say, no, honey, don't do that. But when you have that kind of public precedent, it's very difficult for other kids to understand why this could be a problem. So, haul back out that you have to have conversations and talk, and not be so dogmatic, and you can't do this, you can't something, but look for compromises so you get buy-in. Because if you don't have buy-in, whatever boundaries you set aren't going to be followed. So it's really got to be relational, and whether you understand how TikTok works or not doesn't matter. You understand the values that you bring to the table, and those are the kinds of conversations that are really critical.
And I think what you said there, doing things together. If your child's not old enough, you are, so maybe you do it, show it to them, watch things together, you choose what they watch, and that serves a dual purpose, because you're part of their digital world from day one. It's not like, 13, they're on Instagram and all of a sudden you're following them. They're like, what's my mom doing here? You do it every step of the way. So you're just part of their online world, just like you're part of their offline world. So parents have such an important role to play.
And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the whole controversy around quote unquote Instagram for kids, because one of the struggles that's going on behind the scenes is that we oftentimes talk about 13 plus, right? Because of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and how companies could get sued for showing ads to under 13. And that's why they've created these certain kind of safeguards. But everyone in the industry is well aware that there's 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds on Instagram, because we talk about age gates, but the technical way of making age gates is actually very complex and has a ridiculous amount of holes unless it actually.
But people, other countries
Right.
use it effectively.
Well, interestingly enough, I mean, Australia, like 2 years ago, they talked about how do you reduce under, I think it was under 18, seeing, adult material. And they were talking about using facial recognition, because that would be a way that you could determine somebody's age a little better. But that opened up another can of worms of saying, well, we don't want to use facial recognition, right? So you always have a lot of issues, and Americans are always a little bit more suspect and kind of Orwellian around any identification type of system that you might see at Roblox as well. But what I was going to quickly say about Instagram for kids is it kind of opened up that discussion of saying, okay, if we know there's a lot of 10 and 11-year-olds on major platforms like Instagram, you have a few different options. You could say, okay, let's cut that off and never have 10, 11, 12-year-olds in Instagram. Or what Instagram tried to do, but it really kind of backfired, was do you then create a walled garden, kind of like a kid's version that's going to theoretically be safer, and then be a place that you kind of funnel that age group into. So it's a very fascinating debate around. Right now, we know 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds are using social media. Is that something we alter as society, or is that something we create walled gardens to? That's where a lot of this conversation is actually headed.
There was such a public backlash to that idea of Instagram for kids, especially with the bad press Instagram got last fall, that they've thrown that out the window. That's no longer on the table, and the person in charge of it has left Instagram. So I think parents, that's one way parents played an important role, as they let their voices be heard that this is not something they wanted, and Instagram listened and changed direction. So
yes,
parents can play an important role in this stuff. And then
definitely,
finally, in the interest of time, because we always promise people we'll finish these up in half an hour, schools and kids, I mean, if you know me, this is where I think all the magic happens, because oh my gosh, there's a great article that ran just yesterday, but written by an English teacher in response to a Washington Post article. And it's called "Our Kids Need Media Literacy Like Fish Need Water." And it's so important to read, because it's about how important it is to teach kids in school how to protect themselves, what algorithms are, how to detect misinformation, all the things we talked about that we want the tech companies and legislators to do. It's going to take time. And what we could do today is really lobby our schools to teach this stuff, for kids to have these lessons. If they're not getting them in school, parents find some great literacy lessons online, teach them to your kids at home, because kids need to learn how to protect themselves.
Well, and Diana, I'm going to just underscore the importance of that, because kids don't learn by you telling them something once. They learn through lessons over time that they can interact with. And so it's so important. In all those bills I saw, I didn't see any funding for media literacy programs in the school. We're worrying about cyberbullying. But if we teach kids about media literacy, we're going to cut down on cyberbullying. So it's really important to integrate that reading, writing, and media literacy. I mean, that's their world.
Yeah. David, is your group pushing for education at all?
Yes. I mean, that's a major component of it, because I think where I always like to emphasize is that this is a multi-pronged approach. And oftentimes we're looking for a silver bullet. And the bad news is that there is no silver bullet. The good news is there's a lot of people and there's a lot of groups like CyberWise that are actively out there trying to work towards a better tech future. And I also want to say, since it wasn't mentioned, I know parents are overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. We're all overwhelmed. And that's something I think we should put out there too, is that if you find that these issues are moving fast and furious, it's tough to keep up. We're all going through that. So it's not really about always knowing the latest trends. It's about really kind of thinking deeply and then working kind of holistically with your kids, with the education system, with policymakers, and then all those parts together are going to form a better system.
Yeah, and if you want to know where to go to do something, there's two wonderful organizations, namely the National Association of Media Literacy for Education. They do incredible work in this area, and also Media Literacy Now, and they work with legislators in every state to really push for media literacy in the schools. So two groups that you could really help support. This is such important work. I know for our part, we have the cyber civics curriculum, You know, we do it ourselves. No one funds us. We go out to schools, we beg them to make time in their schedules, and it works. Like, I'm leaving, I got to go in a few minutes because I'm teaching kids today how to be upstanders. Like,
Yes,
so simple. Every 90% of kids are going to see cyberbullying. Nobody knows what to do about it. In 40 minutes, I'm going to give them a lesson. They're going to leave today. If they see any of their peers being cyberbullied, they will know what to do. So, gosh, schools, make time for this stuff, because, like, tell me a law that's going to fix that better.
Well, it's
right.
quickly, like, online safety is almost like safety in the streets. Like, I'm here in Manhattan, I walk outside, you think about making safer streets and the policies we make, but then I also think about myself in terms of my street smarts and what am I doing, right? So you're really kind of focused on the street smarts kind of element of it, and that it's about an individual, it's about education, it's about policy, it's about tech company responsibility. That's where this issue is headed.
Yeah. So, I mean, everyone can play a role here. We can't sit back and wait for just things to magically change, because they're not going to change. And kids are using social media and it's not going to go away. So here we are, our takeaways. We got to each give like a quick one-liner. What can parents do, or people listening today? Pam, what do you think?
I would say, just because all this talk about legislation is going on, don't give up your job as a parent to engage and watch what your kids are doing and guide them.
CJ, you're a fly on the wall today. What's your takeaway from today?
My takeaway is that it's really easy to kind of be really, really high looking down on the problem and be like, yeah, all these other people need to make all of these decisions, but really it starts kind of in the home, and it starts with education. You got to zoom way in and make a difference in the circle of influence that you have, and that's kind of the first domino.
Excellent point. And David, what's your big takeaway on all this?
Biggest takeaway is that parents have such a strong role, and then also have a strong impact. Oftentimes when I talk to parents, it can feel overwhelming, like I mentioned earlier, but also it's easy to be defeatist, easy to just think that just the future is just going to happen. Social media is just on a runaway train. It's not, because we're the people, we're the public, we're affecting the rules that people have to follow. And parents have such a strong role in that, of engaging with their child, their children, and engaging with policymakers, and then putting pressure on tech companies, and really educating, as you talked about as well. I think it's so key.
Yeah, very true. And I saw someone asked us to do a webinar on our cyberbullying curriculum, which would be really fun. So maybe we'll put that on the calendar for one of our future chats.
Yeah, I saw that. That would be great.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much. I know how busy you are. You've got a lot going on. So thank you for sharing your wealth of information. It's fun to reconnect with you and chat again.
It's great. It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Always doing
well.
And CJ, thank you for your hard work putting the podcast together. People, again, if you want to listen to us on Apple, tell me again.
It's on.
Way to sell it.
Yeah, it should be pretty much anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So wherever your kind of regular go-to, it should be there. Spotify, Apple Podcasts are kind of the two biggest ones. They're there. And then I'll just throw out there too, kind of somewhat of a quick plug. There were some questions that popped up that, having just converted this into a podcast and listened to every single episode, there are previous episodes that address the questions that you had. So if they aren't addressed here and now today, go into that back catalog and find the ones that are relevant, because they answer a lot of the questions.
Thank you, CJ. And Pam, as always, thank you, my partner.
Thank you. And next time we're going to talk about your kids are getting the news from TikTok. What does that mean? What do parents do? What are they seeing? And how is that making their view of the world?
It's going to be a good one. So can't wait. All right, everyone. You have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you all later. Chat.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
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 Thanks again.